Why does Latin never follow the rules? In this video, I'm going to talk about irregular perfect verbs. They're really important, but they can be quite confusing. So I thought I'd do a whole video just on common irregular perfect verbs. Those verbs that change wildly in the perfect tense. If you're not sure about perfect verbs as a whole, there's a link in the description to my video about perfect tense verbs. And make sure you've gone to download my free Latin Verbs Complete Reference Guide, which has all the endings for every type of verb. It'll be really useful just to have to hand, and it's completely free. There's a link to that in the description as well. So there are two main types of irregular verbs in Latin. There are the rogue perfects, the ones that go completely off-piste with their perfect tense, and there are the ones that have kind of varied endings to what you'd expect. Rogue perfects include ones like dedi, egi, tuli, and vidi. Dedi comes from do, egi comes from ago, tuli comes from fero, and vidi comes from video. Then there are those that have varied endings, so they change the pattern that we have learnt. So ones like fero, malo, sum, and volo. There is some crossover, so you will see that tuli and fero come from the same thing. Don't be freaked out by that, we'll go through them in a minute. First of all, we're going to look at rogue perfects. These are the ones that are really irregular from their present stem. But don't stress, because English has loads of irregular verbs. Sit, sat, stand, stood, ran, run, deal, dealt, speak, spoke, am, was, tell, told, bring, brought, see, saw. These are all examples of irregular perfects in English. So it's not weird that Latin does this. In fact, this is partially where English gets it from. So Latin is no different to any other language in this regard. So here's how to spot perfects. You look at the third principal part. I know I harp on about this in every one of my videos about verbs, but your principal parts are so important to learn. In your dictionary, you will get servo, servare, servavi, and servatus. You might get that fourth principal part, hopefully you do, in a good dictionary, but an earlier dictionary aimed at a lower level of Latin might just have the first three. But hopefully it does have that third principal part, because that is your perfect stem. That is how your perfect is formed, and it tells you how it changes. So servo is very regular. It does what you expect. It has its present stem and it has its perfect stem, which is quite similar but might have a V added. So that one's very regular. In terms of irregular perfects, textbooks are your friends. Irregular verbs still have principal parts. They are still shown in your dictionaries in the same way. So you might have fero, fere, tuli, latus. This is my favourite verb in Latin because it is just so wild. It looks so different in the perfect to what it looks like in the present. So you have to make it your best friend, otherwise you'll forget about it. So fero, fere, tuli, latus, make it your favourite verb. Tuli is the perfect stem. It's in the same place as the regular perfect, and it means to bring or to carry. Eo, ire, ivi, itum. This means to go. So eo, I go, ire, to go. Ivi is the perfect. I went. That's really irregular in English too. The thing with ivi is it can also just be ii, I, without the V. I'll come to that later. And some esse fui futurus. That's the verb to be. The verb to be is irregular in almost all languages because it's used so much, and Latin's no different. Some means I am, fui means I was. The red ones are your perfects. Learn them. Make sure you know them. Make sure they don't surprise you when you see them in a passage. Now I'm going to have a look at the other type of perfects that we talked about, those that can have varied endings. Volo, vele, volui. Its present tense changes quite a lot. It does still have the endings you expect, but they come in a slightly different way. So volo, I want. Vis, you, singular, want. Vult, he, she, it wants. Volumus, vultis, volunt. The stem itself changes and it becomes a bit weird. So volo is one you need to learn. Luckily, after that, it stays quite regular. Volebam, volebas, volebat, volebamus, volebatis, volebant is the imperfect. I was wanting, you were wanting. That's what you expect. Same for the future. Volam, voles, volet, volemus, voletis, volent. It goes like a third or fourth conjugation verb in the future with the A and the E. The perfect follows the usual pattern. It uses the third principal part, volui, I wanted, and then follows the I isti it, imus istis erunt. So even though it's technically irregular, it still follows the patterns you expect. You just have to be able to use your logical skills and use them in a slightly different way. As long as you know your principal parts, you should be fine. Volo also has some compounds. So, for example, nolo means not want, and malo means prefer, which has a similar meaning. So I want, I don't want, I prefer. That's to do with wanting as well. And these are all based on the stem of volo. The only slightly weird thing is that nolo has non-vult. So if you go back to this one, you have vult for he, she wants, and vis for you singular. It's no-vis, you don't want, and non-vult. Non-vis, non-vult, they're separate words. Other than that, it's exactly as you would expect. Fero fere tuli latus. I told you before, this is my favourite verb. Here's why. Fero fers fert. How ridiculous. Love it. This is the present tense. It, again, has the present endings that you expect, ost, must, isn't, but it doesn't have the thematic vowel you expect. It just does fers, fert. They're not very common to see in the present tense, but don't forget them because they can come up in speech or legal cases. So they are important, but they're not super common. The imperfect is much more common, but is also very regular. It's exactly what you would expect from an imperfect tense. The same for the future. It has the a and the e, like a third or fourth conjugation verb, feram, feres, feret, feremus, feretis, ferent. And then the third principal part comes into play for the perfect. Tuli, tulisti, tulit, tulimus, tulistis, tolerunt. So although the stem changes, it's one of the rogue perfects that goes completely wild from the present stem, the endings are still regular. I isti it, imus istis erunt. So although the present stem has weird endings, you don't have the thematic vowel, the perfect does exactly what you would expect. Fero means bring, carry, bear, and it has lots of compounds. For example, au fero, au feri, abstuli, ablatus. This means to take away, to carry off. And again, although we have the prefix au or abs, it does exactly the same thing. It follows these patterns just with that prefix added on. The same for offero. Offere obtuli ablatus, and refero, refere, retuli relatus. So you might see compound verbs and you have to be able to remember that they do the same thing in the third and fourth principal parts. Eo, iri, ivi, itus. I told you I'd come back to this one. This means I go. Eo, is, it, imus, itis, eunt in the present. Nice and simple, does what you'd expect. In the imperfect, it's ibam, ibas, ibat. So the first letter has changed from the present stem, the AO, but like the rest of the present table, it just uses an I as its first letter. So ibam, ibas, ibat. The future is the same. It uses the I and then uses bo, bit, bit. So ibo, ibis, ibit, ibimus, ibitis, ibunt. I will go, you will go, he, she, it will go. And then we have the perfect. Now you'll see from my third principal part, it can be ivi, which is kind of what you'd expect. It has an I for the stem, the V, which is the perfect signifier, and then the I ending. But you don't always have to have the V. Some writers, especially later on, syncopate, which means shorten the verbs. So they just have E. So it can be ivi, ivisti, ivit, ivimus, ivistis, iverunt, or it can be E, iisti, iit, and so on. So just something to be aware of. AO also has lots of compounds, so I go from, I go into, and I return, or I go back. Again, these all follow the same pattern as AO. So once you've learned one, you effectively have learned all the ones that are compounded from AO. Now, to be is highly irregular. Some esse fui futuris. I've touched on it in this video a little bit, but if you want to have a really in-depth version, I have a whole video on it just on its own, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. I hope this has been helpful for irregular Latin perfects. If you are struggling with any Latin verbs, go and download my complete reference guide. It has all the endings for all tenses, voices, and moods of Latin verbs, so it's super useful just to have to hand as you're starting to do translations. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Bambasbat.